Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Carla. I am a nurse, I'm a gardener, and I also love to cook. So those are the kinds of things that I post here on my channel. Well, I don't post myself nursing, but I do a lot of posts for gardening, which is how this channel really started. But now I'm starting to post some things that I like to cook too, just because people have an interest in it, which is why I'm going to do this next video. So this next video is going to be on sourdough bread. I made it throughout the holidays at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I've just had so many people to ask me, how do you make it? How do you make it? And I've sent a couple people the recipe, but it's just not the same as a demonstration. I think sourdough bread can be a little difficult in the beginning, just because you don't really have a good understanding of it. Not because it's hard to make, because it's not, but you really do have to get a feel for the bread. You have to get a feel for the dough with your fingers to know what it should feel like at different stages. And you'll see what I mean as we go through this process of making the dough, which will then turn into the bread. So all I'm going to really be doing tonight is taking my starter, my sourdough starter, out of the refrigerator and feeding it. And that's all that consists of, is putting some flour and water in a fermented flour and water concoction that I have already made. I made it before Thanksgiving, and I will be doing a video at some point on how to make your own sourdough starter if you have never done that before. You can also get a sourdough starter from a friend, and then you don't have to wait 2 to 3 weeks for your sourdough to develop and ferment to the point that it is strong enough to support making a loaf of bread. So anyway, I'm going to get the sourdough starter out of the refrigerator and show you how to feed it. So I like to use the scales, even though you don't have to. If you will use them when you first start out, until you get an idea of what your starter should look like after it's fed, then you won't have to use the scales anymore. So we're going to use the scales tonight so I can show you how I do it. So here's my starter, fresh out of the refrigerator. Now, I fed it just a couple days ago. And so I keep probably just a little bit more than some people keep, because I like to make large batches of bread. So I'm going to show you what it looks like on the inside. Let me get in the light. So you can see that it's a little bubbly still. I just fed it the other day, but it has some liquidy looking stuff getting on the top, and that's called hooch, and that just means it's hungry again. So I'm going to feed it tonight. I'm going to feed it, because there is probably double of what I normally keep. I normally keep it down to right about here. When I have it down to here, I feed it 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour. But because I have almost double what I normally have, because I plan on making a large batch of bread, I'm going to feed it 100 grams. So the more starter that you have in your jar, the more you're going to have to feed it. Because imagine if you were feeding a person. If you were feeding a little tiny kid, they're not going to eat much. But if you're feeding a big adult, they're going to need a little more to eat. So just kind of think of it that way. So the more starter you have, the more you're going to have to feed it. And trial and error will help you to learn how much to feed your starter. So again, if I'm keeping just the typical amount that most people keep, I just do 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour. But today, for tomorrow's purpose, we are going to do 100 grams. So I'm going to turn my scales on. Actually, probably should have turned them on with my measuring cup on there. So I'm going to zero it out. And it is not on grams, so I'm going to switch it to grams. Okay, it's on grams. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 100 grams. Perfect. That's 100 grams of flour. And then I'm going to do 100 grams of water. Do not use tap water because it has chlorine in it. Chlorine can kill your yeast. I'm going to do 100 grams of water. And then you're just going to stir it up. And you're not supposed to use metal to stir it up. So I'm going to use this. And you don't have to worry about trying to get all the lumps out. It's next to impossible to get them out, and that's okay. So stir it up the best you can, and let me see if I can show you. It is not going to be runny. It's going to be a little bit thicker than pancake batter. And I'm just going to leave this sitting out overnight. And then we'll use it for making bread. So I just count the little notches that are on the side of my jar. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this one has 8, a total of 8 notches in it. Because this starter will at least double and maybe more, if I put very much more in it, I would probably want to put it in another jar. But I think it'll be okay because I'm going to make bread early in the morning. And when you put your lid on, don't put it on all the way. That way air can escape from the lid as it creates gases during the fermentation process. Okay, so you can see where this starter has risen all the way up to the top, and now it's actually starting to go back down. And most of the time you make your bread whenever your starter is at its peak. But for this recipe, it's not going to matter that much because we're going to be using some commercial yeast in this recipe. So I'm not sure why this recipe calls for some commercial yeast. It just calls for a little bit in comparison to the amount of bread that we're going to be making. But I follow the recipe because that's what it calls for. And I don't know, maybe because it's such a large amount, maybe why they are calling for some commercial yeast. But anyway, that's the recipe that we're going to be making. And the commercial yeast does not alter the taste whatsoever. It has no flavor to it. It just helps the rise. So anytime you struggle with sourdough bread, you can add a little bit of commercial yeast until your starter gets a little more developed. So the first thing I'm going to do is add the yeast. Let me look and see how much it needs. Okay, 2 tablespoons of yeast. So I had to warm my water up a little bit because mine was very cold. So you can use room temperature water, which is what I'd normally use. But if you have water that's really cold, warm it up just a little bit. It helps to activate the yeast a little bit better. So I'm going to just add that yeast to the water. And then I'm going to stir that up. Just going to stir that in a little bit. Then I'm going to wait about 5 minutes. And then I'll start adding some of the other stuff. Okay, it's been about 3 or 4 minutes, 4 or 5, something like that. Doesn't even matter. So now I'm going to start adding the other things. I'm going to add the sugar. That is a 1/2 cup. Two tablespoons of salt. And a whole cup of oil. I like to use avocado oil. You can use whatever oil you have on hand. I have used vegetable oil. I have used canola oil. I have used olive oil. But avocado is my favorite universal oil. So that's the one I use. I get this particular one at Sam's. It's just the best deal. Avocado oil can be a little pricey sometimes, so I like to buy the big bottle. It's Oliveri brand. And I like to use the same cup that I just used for the oil for the starter. It doesn't seem to stick to the cup quite as bad when I do it like that. So this recipe calls for 2 cups of starter, so I hope I've got that much in here. There's one. That's actually a little bit more than one. Okay, now there's 2 cups of starter. They tell you not to use any metal stirring utensils whenever you're using sourdough. I can't really remember why, but I just don't do it. Now I'm just going to stir all of that in really well. It might take a minute or two. Now we're going to add the flour. So I don't know what happened to my sound, but I lost it. So I'm going to have to do a voiceover for the rest of this video. Sorry about that. Anyway, the recipe calls for 12 cups of flour. But whenever you start getting close to the end, like whenever you get to cup number 10, you want to stir it up and see where you're at, because the amount of flour that you're going to be able to use is going to be highly dependent on the humidity in your home at the time. So just get to cup number 10, stir it up, see where you're at, and just add flour as you need it from that point on. Then after you get everything incorporated really well, you're just going to form it into a ball the best you can. It does not have to be perfect. It does not have to be pretty, because you're going to fool with it a little bit more in a few minutes. And just be sure to cover it up with some plastic wrap while it sits. Then after it's sat for about 30 minutes, then you're going to come back, uncover it, and then you're just going to do a couple folds. And that's where you just pick it up and just fold it toward the middle about 4 different times. You'll just kind of go all the way around, pick up what you can, fold it over, and push it down. Do that all the way around it until you have folded over all of the sides. Then you're going to cover it back up and leave it sitting for 30 more minutes. All this is doing, it's just allowing your gluten time to develop in your dough. Actually, I'm going to take it out and spray some oil in the bottom of the bowl so that it doesn't stick when I come back. Spray your plastic wrap a little bit too. And after my second fold, I had to run out and ended up being gone longer than I had anticipated. Okay, so I had to run out for about 4 hours. I left at 11 o'clock and I turned the dough right before I left, and it is 3 o'clock now. So I'm going to show you what it looks like if you leave it in a bowl that's a little too small and it's a big old pile of dough. Let me flip the camera around. Look at that. Oh my gosh, it's coming out of the bowl. But that's okay, because we're getting ready to divide it up and get it in some pans. So you see a lot of people use a breadboard and flour to work their dough. I don't do that. I think that a smooth surface and oil works a lot better. At least it does for me. So I've just wiped this down with some soap and water, rinsed it off, and now I'm going to wipe it down with just a little bit of alcohol. Make sure there's no germs left behind, no residual from the soap and water. I'm going to let that dry and then oil my little area down right here with some avocado oil. So hang tight for a minute. So this recipe is supposed to make about 6 loaves of bread. So I'm going to assume that it's talking about a standard 2-pound loaf pan. So dough always, loses a few grams as you make it. I don't know why, but it does. So what we're going to do is we're going to weigh the dough in this bowl, and that way I can make sure that my loaves are even. You don't have to be all extra like that. You can just eyeball it, but I like to make mine even. And I've already zeroed the scales after I put the yellow bowl on there so that I would get just the weight of the dough. Then after I get the weight of the dough, I will divide it by 6, and that way I will know how much to put in each loaf pan. I'm just going to put a little bit of oil on my countertop here. That's olive oil, just because it's in a little more convenient bottle. But again, you can use whatever kind of oil you want. It does not matter. So I'm just going to dump the whole thing out and then start dividing it into each individual loaf. And I've decided to just do 4 loaves and make them just a little bit larger instead of doing 6 smaller loaves. What I'm doing here is making each one of them the exact same weight. So I'm weighing them and measuring them, all 4, because I like for all of my bread to be the same. And you absolutely do not have to weigh it. You can just divide it in 4 and eyeball it as close as you can with your eyes, and that's good enough. It does not have to be perfect. Now you're going to grease your pans. I just used some spray oil on mine. That is avocado oil. Again, you can use whatever kind of oil you want. Now I'm just going to start shaping the dough. And what I'm going to do is to just roll it up into a shape that will fit the size of loaf pan that I'm using. And the reason that you roll it is to create tension on the surface. It just makes a prettier loaf whenever you're finished. It makes it really nice and tight on the top. It makes a beautiful, beautiful loaf of bread. Now I'm just going to pinch the bottom to hold it closed. And just continue to shape it until you have it in the shape that you want. And make sure it's the same length as the pan that you're going to put it in. Now sometimes when you're making sourdough loaf, you want to be gentle as you're rolling it and handling it. But for sandwich bread, I actually do not try to keep the big air bubbles in it, so I mash a lot of them out. Now you can see that I'm using a couple different sizes of loaf pans. The 2 in the back are 2-pound loaf pans, and these long ones here are Wilton 3-pound loaf pans. And the Wilton loaf pans that are longer and thinner are kind of more like a sandwich style bread that you would buy at the grocery store. It's longer and a little more narrow. And again, as you get your dough ready to go into the pan, you're going to roll it out and make it the same length, or as close as you can get it to the same length as the pan that you're putting it in. After you've got all of your dough in the pans that you want them in, you're going to want to cover them up with plastic so that they don't get hard. Whenever you leave dough out to the air, it will create almost like a crust on the outside. So you want to keep it nice and soft until you're ready to bake it. So what I usually do is I spray one side of some plastic wrap and then I just lay it over it loosely. You don't want to put it on tight like you would food that you were going to stick in the refrigerator, because you want to give it time, you want to give it room to rise. And more often than not, it rises up above the pan. Look at that dough in those pans. Isn't it gorgeous? I love making bread, y'all. Now you're just going to let it rise for about another 1.5 to 2 hours. depending on how warm it is in your house. Sometimes I will put it in my oven with just the light on until it's ready. Did you notice one loaf is smaller than the rest of them? Well, that's probably because I stole part of it, almost half of it, and made a sourdough pizza crust. As you can see, the pizza sitting there beside of it. I'll post a picture of the pizza at the end of this video. It turned out awesome. Now you're going to put your bread in the oven and bake it at 350 for about 20 to 30 minutes. Then when your bread looks golden brown and you think it's done, pull it out. If you've got a thermometer and you want to check the temperature, you can. I like for the internal temperature of mine to be at least 185. I usually just stick the thermometer in the side so there's not a hole down in the top of it. It's hidden a little bit when you do it on the side. See, this one's 194. That's perfect. Then I just turn the loaves out onto a cooling rack and let them completely cool before you cut them or put them in a bag. Look at that gorgeous bread. Then I almost always put some melted butter on top, and I usually just take part of a stick of butter. I like to use salted. I think it has more flavor. And I just rub it on top and let it soak in. There's the little mini one I stole half of for my pizza crust. And when I'm feeling a little extra, which is most of the time, I will take either some kosher salt or some sea salt flakes, whatever I have on hand, and I will sprinkle it over top of the melted butter while it's still good and fresh and soft and will stick to it really good. I don't put a whole lot, literally just a few sprinkles of it. The sea salt flakes are best, but I did not have any. So I just used the kosher salt, and I used the coarse, not the fine. And you can see as it cools, it does shrink just a little tiny bit and causes just a few wrinkles in the top of the bread, but not many. Now look at the beautiful crumb of this bread. It is perfect for sandwiches or toast or whatever you want. Now you're ready to bag it up, share it, eat it, whatever you want to do with it, but it is delicious. And just as promised, here is a couple pictures of the pizza crust that I made with the sourdough bread, and it is definitely the best pizza I have ever made. And that's all I've got today, guys. I hope y'all have a great day. God bless you.